All right, so we're back and ready to really get into J. Krishnamurti.
Yeah,
I think a lot of our listeners are probably already familiar with him.
definitely.
But we've got some interesting biographical excerpts here.
Yeah.
And I think we can all, even if you've read a lot of Krishnamurti, kind of get something new out of it,
Yeah.
I think.
It's kind of amazing how his ideas sort of span generations. He was talking about this stuff decades ago, and it's still relevant.
It really is.
He really challenges you to kind of rethink how you think about truth and spirituality and religion and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And that idea of, like forging your own path, right? Like
Right.
not following some sort of dogma, right?
Exactly. It's not about the guru. It's not about the following someone or subscribing to a specific set of...
Yeah, and that reminds me of that quote, like, truth is a pathless land. I feel like that's very central
Yeah,
to his whole...
absolutely.
Mhm.
And to understand that, I think you kind of need to understand where he was coming from.
Yeah.
So if we go way back, right?
Mm.
He was born in India in the late 19th century
Okay.
into a Brahmin family.
And that's like a spiritual...
Yes,
That-
very much rooted in these spiritual traditions and rituals.
Okay.
And then later, he had this encounter with the Theosophical Society, which really shaped his journey. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit
Oh,
about
yeah, and the Theosophical Society, they were the ones that were involved with this whole, like, world teacher prophecy, right?
Right. So the Theosophical Society at that time was this kind of prominent spiritual movement,
Yeah, okay.
attracting people from all over the world. And they believed in this concept of a world teacher,
Okay.
someone who would kind of usher in this new era of enlightenment, right?
Mhm.
And they believed that Krishnamurti was this teacher. They basically plucked him from a relatively normal life in India, groomed him for this extraordinary destiny.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure.
Talk about pressure, right?
And then he rejects all that, right?
And he rejects it in this dramatic fashion.
Yeah.
So picture this, 1929, Krishnamurti standing before this huge crowd of followers.
Okay.
And he says, truth is a pathless land. And in that moment, he dismantled everything they had built around him. It's almost like he was saying, you don't need me. You need to discover truth for yourself.
It's so powerful. And it makes me think about how we're always looking for validation outside of ourselves, like
Right.
even in spirituality, we're conditioned to think that someone else has the answers.
Yeah.
What do you think Krishnamurti would say about, like, I don't know, even something like our career path? Like, we're kind of told you need to pick a career, you need to follow this path. Like, what do you think he would say about that?
I think he would probably argue that if you're choosing a career just based on like societal expectations or pressures from your family or whatever,
Right.
you're probably going to end up living a pretty unfulfilling life, even if you're outwardly successful,
Yeah.
right? Like you might have all the money in the state, but if you're not doing something that truly resonates with who you are at your core, it's going to feel empty. I think he'd probably say, question those expectations,
Mm-hmm.
explore your passions, find what feels right for you, even if it's unconventional.
Right, right. And how many people, I know so many people that feel stuck in their job, they don't really like it,
Right.
and they kind of feel like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what I went to school for. Like, they're kind of...
They're living someone else's life, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that gets at the heart of what Krishnamurti is talking about, this idea of freedom from conditioning,
Okay.
right? The idea that all of these forces, these societal norms, these cultural beliefs that we grow up with,
Uh-huh.
and even our own past experiences, they create this framework that limits how we see ourselves in the world.
So how do you break free from that conditioning? It feels so, like, ingrained in us.
Well, Krishnamurti would say the first step is awareness. He was really big on self-observation, but not in a kind of like judgmental, self-critical way.
Right.
It's more about becoming a mindful observer of your thoughts, your emotions, your reactions, without getting swept away by them.
So, like, creating that space between you and your thoughts, like
Yeah.
becoming the observer
Right.
rather than the thinker. But isn't self-observation just another form of thinking? Like, how do you escape that loop?
That's a great question. And it really gets to the heart of Krishnamurti's approach to meditation,
Okay.
right? He wasn't advocating for these like rigid practices or trying to empty your mind completely. He was more about cultivating awareness in everyday life.
So I don't have to sit in lotus pose.
No lotus pose required. He just said, just observe what's going on inside without judgment.
So, okay, so just observe your thoughts, but how does that create change? How does that actually lead to any sort of transformation? Like, you're just watching them.
Well, Krishnamurti's idea was that by simply observing our thoughts and emotions without judgment, their power over us diminishes. It's like if you imagine shining a light on something that's been lurking in the shadows.
Okay.
Once it's exposed, it loses its grip.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's almost like when you stop fighting with your thoughts, when you stop identifying with them,
Yeah,
they lose their power over you.
exactly.
Interesting.
And as we become more aware of our thought patterns, we start to see how they influence our actions,
Okay.
our relationships. Krishnamurti often said that relationships serve as mirrors. They reflect back to us aspects of ourselves that we might not otherwise see.
Oh, interesting. So our relationships become opportunities for self-discovery.
Exactly.
That reminds me of a time when
Yeah.
this friend
Uh-huh.
and
It's like he's saying, look at those conflicts that keep coming up.
yeah.
Those patterns in how you interact with people.
Yeah.
They're showing you something about yourself that you might not be aware of.
Oh, yeah. And I had this friend, and I always felt like I had to prove myself to them,
Uh-huh.
you know? And I was always seeking their approval. And I realized, like, after a while, it was like, wow,
Right.
this is like an insecurity that I've been carrying around since I was a kid.
Yeah, it's amazing how these early experiences, they really stick with us.
Yeah.
And Krishnamurti would say these patterns, these ingrained patterns of thinking, they're actually the root of a lot of our suffering.
Okay, so I'm with you on that.
Yeah?
But how do you go from observing those thoughts to actually transforming them?
Right.
Like, do they just magically disappear?
Well, Krishnamurti wouldn't say just sit back and watch your thoughts go by.
Okay.
He was a big believer in action, right action.
Okay.
But the key is that the action has to come from a place of understanding,
Okay.
not from our conditioned responses.
So it's not about like forcing yourself to change or following some kind of strict moral code.
No, not at all. It's more about noticing when you're about to react in your habitual way, based on that old pattern of fear or insecurity or whatever it is, and asking yourself, is there a different way to respond, a more conscious choice I could make?
So like responding rather than reacting.
Exactly.
How do you even know when you're acting from those conditioned patterns? Sometimes it just feels like your thoughts and emotions just take over.
Right, and it's a constant process.
Yeah.
Krishnamurti was very clear that it's not easy.
Yeah.
He said that real freedom is becoming aware of those impulses, those habitual ways of thinking and reacting, and then consciously choosing a different path.
Okay, so recognizing when you're about to slip back into those old grooves
Yeah.
and making an effort to steer yourself in a new direction.
You got it. And remember, it's not about reaching some perfect state of enlightenment where you never make mistakes.
Yeah.
It's about those tiny shifts in awareness, right?
Yeah.
It's about those moments where you catch yourself reacting and you choose a more thoughtful response.
This reminds me of that idea. Truth is a pathless land.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's basically saying we all have to like forge our own unique path to understanding, right?
That's a great connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no one-size-fits-all solution here.
Right.
He's encouraging us to engage in this ongoing process of self-discovery, and the journey itself is where the real growth happens.
Yeah. So it's not about getting to some endpoint.
Right.
It's about the process.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like he's saying, don't accept things blindly. Question everything, even your own
It
perceptions.
sounds like he's saying think for yourself,
Yeah.
basically.
And that kind of questioning, that relentless pursuit of truth, it has huge implications, not just for us personally, but for society as a whole.
So Krishnamurti wasn't just some like isolated philosopher sitting in a cave somewhere. He actually believed his ideas could change the world.
Oh, absolutely. He had this vision of a world where people were more aware, more compassionate, more connected to each other and the planet.
Okay.
And he saw education as a key part of making that happen.
Speaking of education, I know he founded a few schools, right? Were they based on his philosophy?
Yeah, the Krishnamurti schools are actually a really interesting example of his ideas being put into practice.
What made them so different? Like, what set them apart from other schools?
Well, for one, they weren't just focused on academics.
Okay.
Krishnamurti thought education should cultivate the whole person, encourage critical thinking, foster creativity, nurture a sense of responsibility for yourself and the world.
So it's like, instead of just memorizing facts and taking tests, he wanted kids to learn how to think for themselves.
Right, and to question the status quo,
Yeah.
which I think is really crucial for creating a more just and equitable world.
It sounds like he was a real visionary, both in his personal philosophy and his approach to education.
He was way ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
But were his ideas well received? Like, did people embrace his unconventional approach?
Krishnamurti's teachings weren't always met with open arms. Not everyone loved it.
And I bet
He was challenging deeply held beliefs, and sometimes he ruffled some feathers.
Yeah.
He constantly pushed people out of their comfort zones, urging them to question authority.
Even his own authority, right.
Exactly. He didn't want to be put on a pedestal.
Yeah.
But his unwavering commitment to truth and his genuine compassion, those things resonated with a lot of people. And his influence keeps growing even today.
It's amazing how someone who so actively rejected the role of a guru became such an influential figure.
Yeah, it's kind of paradoxical, isn't it?
It is. It is.
But it makes sense when you think about it.
It's like his message of self-reliance and inner truth that really spoke to people
Right.
more than any kind of traditional teacher-student dynamic.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Krishnamurti wasn't interested in followers. He wanted to awaken the individual, to empower each person to become their own guide.
He was like the ultimate anti-guru.
He was all about breaking down hierarchies and encouraging people to find their own truth.
This has been super insightful. I'm really starting to get a deeper understanding of Krishnamurti and his ideas.
I'm glad to hear that.
But I'm curious about his later years and how his teachings continued to evolve.
Yeah, great question.
Did he keep sharing his message? Did he continue to be active? It's incredible how he continued to make such an impact, even though he was, like, challenging so many traditional ideas.
Yeah.
Did he keep, like, traveling and giving talks, even later in life?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Krishnamurti was incredibly active even into his 80s.
Wow.
Giving talks, engaging in these really fascinating dialogues with thinkers from all sorts of fields, scientists, philosophers, educators.
Yeah, it's like he wasn't just speaking to one specific audience.
Right, exactly. He wanted to reach anyone who is open to questioning, to exploring these deeper truths.
You know, I was rereading the section about his conversation with David Bohm, the physicist.
Oh, yeah.
And that was so fascinating to me, just the way they were talking about consciousness and reality, like the interconnectedness of everything.
Right. It's like they were trying to bridge the gap between science and spirituality.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, how do these different ways of understanding the world actually, like, fit together?
Exactly. And I think that's a big part of what makes Krishnamurti so relevant today. I mean, he was grappling with these huge issues that we're still facing, like violence and conflict, environmental destruction.
Yeah. He wasn't just talking about, like, personal enlightenment.
Right.
He was concerned with the state of the world.
Absolutely. And he really believed that real change couldn't just come from politics or social reforms. It had to start with a shift in human consciousness.
So, like, a move away from greed and fear and the pursuit of power.
Exactly. It all comes back to that core message of self-transformation, right?
Yeah.
Like, we can't fix the problems out there if we don't address the problems within ourselves.
Yeah. That's powerful. So it's not just about sitting around meditating. It's about actually taking action in the world.
Right. But the action needs to come from a place of understanding, not from, like, blind ideology or dogma.
Yeah.
He always encouraged people to be critical thinkers, to act from a place of awareness.
And I think that's something our listeners can really connect with. They're already on this path of self-discovery, seeking knowledge and understanding.
Yeah.
And Krishnamurti gives us these tools, these insights that can help us navigate that journey with more, like, clarity and authenticity.
He invites us to be active participants in our own lives.
Yeah.
To take responsibility for our thoughts, our actions, and our impact on the world.
And to never stop questioning, never stop exploring.
Yeah.
Like, the journey never really ends.
It doesn't. And I think that's maybe the most beautiful part of Krishnamurti's legacy. It's a reminder that life itself is an ongoing process of learning, growing, and evolving.
It's not about reaching some final destination.
Right. The journey is the reward.
That's a great thought to end on. Well, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the life and teachings of J. Krishnamurti, and we hope you found it insightful, maybe even inspiring. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep. Until next time.